Thank you, Kate, for such a wonderful, uplifting way to start the service. Morning. I'm Jim Black, and I'm the service leader today. And it's on a beautiful spring day. If you could take a moment to make sure that your cell phones are turned off and things are quiet. And if during the service you have any problems hearing, just raise your hand and David will adjust the sound. It's our custom to invite people who have not been here for a while or have not been here ever before, if they feel comfortable, to stand and introduce themselves and just maybe mention where they're from. Anybody feeling courageous? Bold? Okay. On the back of the order of service, there are announcements. And if you have any additions or embellishments or changes, Terry will bring the mic around and let us know what needs to happen.
Good morning. Carol Soper, and I'm bringing an announcement for do you want to continue to live in your home as you get older? If you live in Sister Bay or Liberty Grove, SAIL, which is an acronym for Senior Advocates for Independent Living, is working to fill this need. We are part of the Village to Village network, which was developed more than 20 years ago and has a network of over 300 villages nationwide. A group of local citizens has been, I got turned up, working on this since May of 2023, and with the goal of launching this summer. and offering some services. Potential services include errands, grocery shopping, dog walking, pet sitting, companion visits, daily checkups. We do not want to duplicate services already being offered. This is a community effort, and we need support through serving on our board or committees to contribute to development and growth, volunteers who can lend their time and enthusiasm to our mission, and financial support through donations to continue to make this successful. Our steering committee meets every first and third Thursday at 2 o'clock at the Sister Bay Fire Station. Please join us. If you have questions, would like more information, contact me, and I'll leave some flyers up on the counter also.
Oh, excellent. Very needed service. Thank you. Well, we're moving along efficiently, I guess. The opening words are by William Schultz. Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. The chalice lighting words are by Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as a people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of life we share together. Please stand for hymn 38, Morning is Broken, and remain standing for the unison affirmation and doxology.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rains to fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, strong in completeness, where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, angels so play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's great creation of the new day.
We gather together to seek knowledge and wisdom, to explore freely the vast reaches of mind and spirit, to celebrate within a caring community those truths, ancient and modern, which give meaning and direction to our lives. From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill, honor be sung in every land, by every tongue. This is the time in our service that we have an opportunity to share a joy that we might have or a burden that's hitting low in our hearts. And recall that this is being broadcast live, so if you are speaking of somebody else, make certain that you have permission. And again, Terry will bring the mic around. Does anybody have a joy to share? No concern. Here we go.
Lindley's, a very belated thank you to Bruce Nelson. He listened to me harangue about her sink in the kitchen for years. And a couple of months ago, the new one was installed. And I am beyond joyful and thankful. And you won't hear from me again. So that's good. The other thanks is to, what's your name? Jim.
I'm Jim.
You're Jim, and you are Trish, who helped me put together a new deck bench yesterday. Would have taken me at least 5.5 days. They are so expert, they did it in about 15 minutes. And I don't think they hurt themselves at all.
Hi, I'm Karen Winsens. I'm celebrating the fact that I can drive. I had hammer toe surgery and it was awful because my husband had to cart me around all the time and wait on me hand and foot. I'm sure he's very glad that I can drive now.
Hi, I'm Jamie Henrity. I'm going to stay seated if you don't mind. My joy is that we sold our house a year ago in Milwaukee. Many of you know that. My concern is that we now have double of everything and and sometimes triple. And so I have lots of things. If you need anything, come and see me because it is yours. And today I brought something funny, which are tin can rubbers. And if you know, you know. These are tin can rubbers. If you have a dog, you're going to want these. So come and see me.
Very good. Thank you.
Hi, we're happy that our daughter and son-in-law have chosen to spend their Memorial Day week with us and also to work while they're here. So welcome. You're doing a great job.
We have yet to hear from Brent, whether he's doing a great job or not.
Yeah, he's worried about you.
I'm Sally Mom, and I have 3 grandchildren, 1 granddaughter and 2 grandsons. And the youngest grandson is getting married in July. I'm thrilled. Thank you.
I just had my garage all finished with a new floor. So everything from the garage is on my front porch. So I'm going to be calling a few people to ask for some help to put it where it belongs. Thank you.
So now it's time for the offering for the financial support of the fellowship. We can't do this without your help. You can give today or give online if you so choose. Thank you. Very nice. Thank you. Our speaker today is Brent Heggie, and did say that the TV, if you can't see it's fine, because it's just going to be words. And Brent's bio in the Butler University directory is quite impressive, almost as impressive as Ken Boyd's lauding of his son-in-law. He sat in the hangar and just gave me all this stuff about Brent and how great he is. So anyway, he is a faculty member of Butler Religious Study Program. In 2017, he received the Outstanding Faculty Award for Excellence in Teaching from Butler College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. In 2017, he was appointed the Compass Center Scholar in Residence, and in 2021, he was promoted to Senior Lecturer in Religion. I look very forward to his message, and after the service, there will be a talk back about 11:15 to 11:45. We'll be on this side of the fellowship, so thank you very much. So let's take a moment of quiet to clear our minds for Brent's message.
Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be back with you. It's been about 7 years, I think, since I've been at UUFDC, and my wife Kate and I are really happy to be here and visiting our in-laws, or my in-laws, her parents. Like Jim said, there are just words on the screen, so there's nothing spectacular that you're missing. There is one slide that has some architecture in the words that I'll make sure to point out. So my talk is about the two different creation stories in Genesis, and it's helpful to know those stories as we go into the talk. So I'll read the first two chapters of Genesis for us, and please follow along in the insert and pay attention to any details that you notice. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters, and every living creature that moves, of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no one to till the ground, but a stream would rise from the earth and water the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You may eat freely of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall die." Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper as his partner." So out of the ground the Lord formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whenever the man called each living creature, that was its name. The man gave names to all the cattle, and to the birds of the air, and to every animal of the field. But for the man there was not found a helper as his partner. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man he made into a woman, and brought her to the man. Then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken." Therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. So those are the first two chapters of Genesis. So we're going to do a little deep dive and see what's going on in these two chapters of Genesis to see what we're dealing with. Genesis 1, really Genesis 1 and the first 4 verses of Genesis 2. Maybe you know this, maybe you don't. There weren't chapter numbers in the biblical books until the 13th century, and there weren't verse numbers until the 16th century. So, for example, it was impossible to cite John 3:16 until about 1560. So the first story, Genesis 1, in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth, we see that there's 7 days of creation. And this is the one scene where it's helpful to see it, but I'll explain it. So there's 2 columns, and then at the bottom, there's one more line. So on the left column are 3 days. And what does God create on each day? And how does God create? So in Genesis 1, there's a very repetitive, sort of repetitious rhythm to the story. God says, God says, God says, let there be, let there be, let there be. God speaks creation into existence in the first chapter. So the first day, God separates light from darkness. He calls the light day, the darkness night, first day. The second day, God puts a dome in the sky to separate the waters above. That's why the sky's blue, y'all, because there's water up there, and the waters below. Second day. The third day, God separates out the lands from the waters and causes plants to grow. And then the fourth day, God creates the sun and the moon. And you might be wondering, how is there light before there's the sun? How are there plants before the sun to do photosynthesis, right? Day 5, God creates all of the fish that swim in the sea and all the birds that fly in the air. Day 6, God creates all the animals, all the creepy crawly things, the text says, that crawl upon the face of the earth. And finally, God creates humankind. Then on the 7th day, God literally takes a sabbatical. God Shabbats, God rests. And in universities to this day, most universities, sabbaticals happen every 7 years because of this verse. Sabbatical is every 7. And so if you look at this, you'll notice that there's 3 on the left side, 3 on the right side. Does anybody who's maybe on this side of the room, does anybody notice something in the way that I've structured it? Does anybody see a pattern? A lot of it's separating, right? God creates by separating things. If you look at the left side, so the first 3 days, light and dark, waters and sky, earth and vegetation, God's creating the context. The next 3 days, God creates all of the beings that fill that context. So light and dark, sun and moon. Waters and sky, fish and birds. Earth and vegetation, animals and human beings. And so there's an architecture to creation in the first story. And then the 7th day, creation is finished. God basically sits down on the throne and rests, right? So this is the first story. God is speaking creation into existence in this very ordered, structured, architectural way in 7 days. Now the second story, which if you look at your insert, you'll notice I left some spaces. On the back of the sheet, there's some spaces between. So this is the first story ends, then the second story. In the day that the Lord God made the heavens and the earth, or the earth and the heavens. First story, 7 days. Second story, all 1 day. So what does the Lord God do here? First thing the Lord God does is form a human out of dirt and breathe into its nostrils the breath of life. Then the Lord God plants a garden and puts the human in it. Then the Lord God makes all the plants grow. Then the Lord God looks around and says, it's not good that you're alone. Let me make you a helper, a partner. And what the Lord God does is make all the animals and the birds and tell the human, okay, pick one for your mate. And the human looks around and says, I don't want any of these. And so the Lord God says, you're right, my bad, my mistake. Makes the human fall asleep, takes the rib, makes the woman, right? And then the man looks at the woman and says, now we're talking. Now I can get with this. And then we're off and running to the next chapter, which is the story of the serpent and the fruit and the fall and all that. So what's different in these stories? There's a lot that's different. The first difference I want to point out is there are different names for the divine reality in the 2 stories. If you look carefully at the insert, you'll notice the first story is God, 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 God. The second story, it's Lord God, Lord God, Lord God. And Lord is spelled capital L, small caps O-R-D, right? That's not an accident. That's not a coincidence. The name for the creator in Hebrew in the first story is Elohim. And Elohim is the generic word for any deity. So all the different gods of all the nations in the Hebrew Bible are called Elohim. What's interesting is that Elohim is plural. So the singular is Eloah, which if you listen, Eloah very easily becomes Allah. Allah in Arabic. So Allah in Arabic just means the God. Eloah in Hebrew just means a generic God. The second story uses God's proper name, Israel's God, as opposed to all the other gods. And it's spelled this way, YHWH, all in capital letters. This is God's proper name. And so if you're Jewish and devout, you will never say that word. It's unpronounceable. I'm not Jewish, so usually in scholarship, we call it Yahweh. But if I'm Jewish, I'm reading through this, and if I get to this word in the text in the context of prayer, I say Adonai, which means my Lord. And so that's why it's always written this way. Capital L, small caps O-R-D, to indicate this isn't the word Lord. It's not Adonai in Hebrew. It's Yahweh. So those are two differences, right? The first story is God doing the creating, Elohim. The second story is Yahweh, is the Lord God. The second difference, there are different numbers of days it takes for creation to happen. The first story, it's 7 days, 6 really. The seventh day is resting. The second story, it says, in the day that the Lord God created the earth and the heavens. So it's 1 day of creation in the second story. The deity creates in different ways in the two stories. In the first story, God speaks creation into existence, just commands things to appear. In the second story, the Lord God is like a kid in a sandbox playing in the dirt, right? Physically forms the human, physically forms the animals and the birds. The extent of creation is different between the two stories. So in the first chapter, it's the entire universe that God creates. In the second story, it's much more local. It's 2 human beings, it's the birds and the animals, and it's a garden in this one particular place. Doesn't say anything about creating the stars or the sun and the moon or anything else. The order in which things are created is different. So in the first story, you get light, then you get the sky and the waters, then you get lands, then you get the plants, then the sun and the moon, then fish and birds, then animals, then humankind. In the second story, the man's first, 1 man, then the plants, then the birds and animals, then the woman. The last big difference is the relationship between male and female in the stories. So in Genesis 1, it's all humankind created together, male and female, in the image of God. It doesn't say how many, it just says humankind. In the second story, it's pretty clear that the man comes first and the woman is derived from the man, right? And so there's a separation between the sexes in a way that's not there in the first story. So what's similar in these stories? There's a lot of differences, but there are some similarities too. The first is that in both stories, it's clear that creation is the result of the act, the sort of intentional act of the deity, whether it's God or the Lord God. Creation isn't random and it's not an accident. It has purpose in both stories. In both stories, there's a total dependence of creation on the divine reality for its existence. There's no independence of creation. There's no creation without the divine. Another similarity is that there's delight in beauty and diversity and difference in creation, that the divine reality loves creation and sees that it's good and that it's beautiful. And then in both stories, human beings have responsibilities to creation. In the first story, it's framed as dominion or lordship. So human beings are to engage with creation in a similar way to God, right? Caring for it, nurturing it. In the second story, the human is told to till and keep the garden, right? To be a gardener in God's garden. So in both stories, the human beings have a special responsibility to be stewards and protectors. All right, so clearly these are different stories. These are not one story told in 2 different ways. These are just completely independent, in some ways contradictory stories. So what's the context? Where do these stories come from and what are they getting at? The first story, Genesis 1, is written by a group of priests. It's called the P source in scholarship, a group of priests writing around the time of the exile in Babylon. So 6th century BCE. So Nebuchadnezzar's armies from Babylon come and destroy Jerusalem. They destroy Solomon's temple. And so at that time, the understanding was that this is where God's presence is located. So worship can't happen if there's no temple. So needless to say, this is experienced as a catastrophe, right? As chaos. as destabilization. And then what you see in this story is that God creates by bringing order to chaos. God's separating things, bringing structure, bringing order. It's the architecture of it is really important. God is portrayed sort of as a king, right? Who commands things and they just happen, right? Kings do that. Kings speak and things happen. So God's a cosmic king commanding creation into existence. And the reason that I put the days this way with the first 3 days, the second 3 days, and then the seventh day is because what the priestly authors are doing is saying the temple might be destroyed, but that doesn't matter because the whole universe is the temple. God's temple is the universe. There's a structure to it. And God is enthroned not in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, but God is enthroned in the earth so that God can be experienced anywhere. So don't worry if the temple's gone. It doesn't mean that we're cut off from God. And it makes sense that this is written by priests, right? This focus on temple imagery, this focus on the rhythms of the week, of work, of worship, of rest, of Sabbath. So the last thing that's kind of unique about this story is where human beings fit, right? Human beings are sort of the cherry on top of the sundae of the universe, the pinnacle of creation. Little lower than the angels is how a psalmist puts it. Created in the image of God, in the likeness of God. So that's the first story, written by a group of priests around the 6th century BCE. The second story is written by a different group of authors called the Yahwists, and it's called the J source in scholarship because Germans came up with all this, and German doesn't really use Y, so Yahweh is spelled with a J. This story is about 300 to 400 years older than the first chapter. So the second chapter is several centuries older. It's around the 10th to the 9th century BCE. And if you look at the second story, you'll notice it's not really interested in cosmic, universal issues. It's much more local. It's much more particular. And so you get a much more intimate image of the deity. It's anthropomorphic, right? The Lord God is there in the dirt making stuff and breathing into it. And in the third chapter, the Lord God is walking around in the garden because the Lord God likes to breathe, right? And so there's a lot more intimacy between living beings and the Lord God. There's a lot more closeness instead of this distance, this separation that we see in the first story. One thing I always like telling my students is that the Lord God has some trial and error in the second story, makes mistakes. The Lord God says to the human, it's not good that you're alone. You should have a partner. And so the Lord God makes a bunch of like animals. Says, all right, pick one, right? And then the human calls God out on the mistake and says, this isn't right. I don't want any of these. And so the Lord God fixes the mistake. You wouldn't see that kind of acknowledgement of trial and error in the first story at all. But in the second story, they're fine with saying, God made a mistake. If the first story, there's a very close connection between humanity and God. In the second story, the connections to the earth, literally coming out of the dirt. And there's wonderful puns in Hebrew that we don't have in English. So the word for human in Hebrew is Adam, which is where we get the name Adam. The word for dirt is Adamah. And so Adam made out of Adamah. We're literally earthlings. We're dirt creatures. And then the third chapter of Genesis is where we get the line, remember your dust, and to dust you shall return. So if you're familiar with the holiday of Ash Wednesday in Christianity, these are the words that are spoken when the ashes are traced on the forehead. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. This focus on connection is really important. Relationship in the second story. Relationship to the Lord God, relationship to the earth, relationship to other creatures. The Adam, Adamah, but also now, once the woman is taken out of the rib, the human is not called Adam anymore. The human is called a man. So we don't get sexual difference until there's a pair. So now the man is called Ish and the woman is called Isha from the man. And then both are placed in the garden to be gardeners. And so again, there's this deep connection to the earth. That's a difference in the second story. So what do these mean if they're contradictory? If they're not saying the same thing? What's going on in these stories? Well, the first thing to recognize is that this is not a science textbook. And so if we're looking to it for scientific facts about the origins of the universe, we're in big trouble, right? These are stories. These are myths. And typically today, when we say something's a myth, what do we mean? It's not true, right? This is not what myths mean in the context of religious studies and theology, right? Myths are profoundly true, but not in a factual, empirical sense. They're true the way that novels and poetry and music are true. Right? They're about meaning. They're not about facts. They're about orientation in the world. Right? This is the power of myths and stories. And what these myths do is they orient people in a certain way in the world in relation to the divine reality, but also to one another. And that's the purpose of these two stories, right? So what do we see in Genesis 1? We see a community in crisis. It's written either while they're still in exile in Babylon or immediately after. Everything that they thought was stable is not. Everything's fallen apart. And so what you get in this first story is comfort, a reminder of God's sovereignty. Like God is in control, even if everything looks like God's not. There's a structure, there's an order to the universe. Chaos does not win. Right? Structure, order wins. There's stability in the universe. And there's human dignity. This is a period where the people have been in exile and essentially in slavery for 40, 50 years. So it's a reminder of the dignity of human beings. The second story is very different. Right? The second story is a reminder of our connection to the earth, of the contingency of our existence, right? Of finitude. And the importance of relation to God, relation to the earth, relation to one another. And so if we try to harmonize those two stories into one scientific account, we miss all of that. And also it just can't be done. They're different stories. So that's sort of the last question. Why would the ancient editors of the Bible keep two obviously different contradictory stories right next to each other in the very first book of the Bible? They weren't dumb. They knew these were different stories. It's not like it didn't occur to them that these are not the same story, right? So they did it for a reason. They kept these two stories next to each other for a reason. It's because we get a richer sense of things if we have multiple angles and perspectives. It's the same reason there are 4 Gospels in a New Testament and not just one, right? We get a richer sense of things. It speaks to different communities with different desires and needs and frustrations and hopes. And so again, if we try to harmonize these into science, we miss all of that. We miss it. And so there are resources we have to understand the origins of the universe and of human beings, and those resources are scientists. But if we want to understand what it means to live meaningfully and authentically in the world in relation to a sacred reality, that's the role of myth and ritual and theology. That's not the role of science. And so these two stories are really helpful to give us a sense of the complexities of what it means to be a human in the world in relation to the divine reality and to one another. And to recognize that we really do exist in this one web of life. And so to remind ourselves of that, we'll now sing We Celebrate the Web of Life. And that's number 175.
We celebrate the web of life, its magnitude we sing. For we can see divinity in every living thing. A fragment of the perfect whole in cactus and in quail. As much in tiny barnacle as in the great blue whale. Of ancient dreams we are the sum, our bones link stone to star, and bind our future worlds to come with worlds that were and are. Respect the water, land. which gave all creatures birth. Protect the lives of all that share the glory of the earth.
Thank you, Brent. That was fascinating. I'm looking forward to talk back. Yeah, it should be interesting. So about 11:10, 11:15, chimes will ring and we'll come back over here and get a deeper conversation, which is pretty amazing because that was pretty deep to begin with. So thank you. So, the closing words are by Elizabeth Jones. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of the truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.